The sun hadn't cleared the ridge when the world turned to fire in screaming metal. Chief Petty Officer Elena Thornburg felt the blast wave before she heard it, a compression of air that turned her lungs inside out and slammed her against the roof of the Humvee. The IED had been buried deep, shaped charge pointed upward, designed not to disable, but to obliterate. When the smoke cleared enough to see, the lead vehicle was gone. Not damaged, gone. Just a crater and burning pieces scattered across 50 meters of Syrian hardpack. She was moving before her ears stopped ringing. Training took over. Assessment, reaction, execution. The convoy had stopped dead across the valley floor, 8 vehicles strung out like beads on a wire, and somewhere in that chaos were wounded men who needed her more than they needed their fear. Master Chief Garrett Vance grabbed her shoulder as she vaulted from the vehicle. He was 58 years old, 3 weeks from retirement, and his eyes held the kind of clarity that only came from watching young men die for 3 decades. Thornburg, wait for the sweep. She didn't wait. The second explosion came from the ridge, a mortar round that hit with mathematical precision between the third and fourth vehicles. Shrapnel sang through the air like 1,000 angry hornets. She was already running, low and fast, toward the burning wreckage of the lead Humvee. The heat hit her face like an open oven. Inside the twisted frame she could see movement. Someone was still alive. Private Ethan Bradock was 19 years old and screaming. The blast had welded his door shut and filled the interior with smoke thick enough to drown in. Elena didn't think. She grabbed the frame where the window used to be and pulled. The metal was hot enough to sear through her gloves. She pulled anyway. The door came free with a shriek of tortured steel, and Bradock fell into her arms, his uniform smoking, his face black with soot. "I got you," she said, and meant it. The third explosion caught her halfway back to cover. She felt the impact in her bones before the pain arrived, a sensation like someone had driven a railroad spike through her abdomen. The shrapnel entered just below her ribs and tore through at an angle, missing her spine by inches, exiting through the meat of her outer thigh. She didn't fall, couldn't fall. Bradock was dead weight across her shoulders, and 40 meters was a lifetime measured in footsteps and willpower. Behind her, the ridge erupted with automatic weapons fire. The ambush had been textbook. Pin them down, separate them, destroy them piece by piece. Captain Marcus Hayward was screaming into the radio for air support that would take 20 minutes to arrive. In a firefight, 20 minutes was eternity. Elena made it to the hasty triage point with Bradock still breathing. The medics tore him from her shoulders without a word, without eye contact, rushing him to a canvas tarp already stained red. She stood there for a moment, swaying, trying to focus through the gray static creeping into the edges of her vision. Blood was running freely down her leg, pooling in her boot. She pressed a hand to her abdomen, and it came away slick and dark. Chief Medic Ryan Blackwell looked up from the soldier he was working on. His eyes passed over her, cataloging and dismissing in the same glance. "You're conscious," he said, not a question, a judgment. "I'm hit," Elena said. Her voice sounded far away, like someone else was speaking. "Penetrating abdominal trauma. Need pressure and—" "You're talking," Blackwell cut her off. "That means you're not priority. Sit down over there and wait your turn." Specialist Amy Kessler, barely 26 and 3 months out of Fort Sam Houston, looked up from the tourniquet she was tying. Her eyes went wide when she saw the blood spreading across Elena's uniform. "Chief, she needs to get out of my way," Blackwell snapped. "We've got soldiers dying here, real casualties. Move her." 2 privates grabbed Elena under the arms and half-dragged, half-carried her behind the bulk of an MRAP. They dropped her in the dirt like a sack of gear and disappeared back into the organized chaos of the triage point. She tried to stand. Her legs didn't respond. She tried to call out. Her voice broke into a cough that tasted like copper and salt. 30 feet away, Master Chief Vance was being loaded onto a stretcher. He'd taken shrapnel in the arm and shoulder. Nothing that would kill him, but enough to ground him for the evacuation. He saw her there, crumpled against the tire, and his face went hard. "That's a SEAL," he shouted at Blackwell. "Treat her first." Captain Hayward stepped between them. He was 48 years old, Logistics Corps, a man who'd spent more time behind a desk than a rifle. "Gunny, we're loading critical only. She'll make the next bird." "There won't be a next bird," Vance said. But Hayward was already turning away, shouting into his radio about extraction windows and threat vectors. The helicopters came in low and fast, kicking up a dust storm that turned the world brown and made breathing feel like drowning. Elena watched through the gap beneath the MRAP as stretchers were loaded one after another. Bradock went up. Vance went up, still arguing, his voice lost in the rotor wash. Soldiers with wounds less severe than hers went up. The last bird lifted with a sound like the world tearing in half, and then there was silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that pressed down on the chest and made the heart forget its rhythm. She was alone. The convoy had left. They'd taken everyone but her. Elena rolled onto her side and vomited into the dirt, blood and bile and the remnants of the morning's coffee. When the spasm passed, she lay there for a moment, listening to the distant pop of gunfire and the closer sound of her own breathing. Fast, shallow, the kind of breathing that meant shock was coming and death wasn't far behind. Her dog tags had slipped free from her collar, hanging in the dust. The metal caught the early light, and there it was, stamped into the steel, the Navy SEAL Trident, earned through Hell Week and 100 impossible evolutions. Earned through nights when her body begged to quit and her mind refused. Earned through being told 1,000 times that women didn't belong, couldn't hack it, would get someone killed. And now it hung there in the dirt, unseen by the men who'd left her behind because they hadn't bothered to look. The radio on the dead sergeant's body crackled with static. She couldn't reach it, not yet. First, she had to deal with the fact that she was bleeding out in the Syrian desert with no backup, no evac, and approximately 90 minutes before blood loss would make the decision for her. Elena Thornburg pressed both hands to her abdomen and pushed herself to her elbows, then to her knees, then with a sound that was half scream and half prayer, to her feet. The world tilted sideways. She caught herself against the MRAP and held on until the horizon stopped spinning. When she could see clearly again, she looked down at herself. The wound in her abdomen was bad. The one in her thigh was worse. The bleeding needed to stop or nothing else mattered. 15 meters away, partially buried under the rubble of a collapsed supply crate, was a medical ruck. Someone had dropped it during the scramble. She could see the red cross on the canvas, faded but distinct. It might as well have been 15 miles. She took a step. Her leg buckled. She took another step. This time, it held. The third step was easier. The fourth nearly killed her. By the time she reached the ruck, she was crawling, leaving a blood trail in the dust like a wounded animal dragging itself toward water. She grabbed the pack and pulled it close, fumbling with the straps with fingers that didn't want to work properly. Inside, quick clot packets, tourniquets, IV bags, morphine auto-injectors, and a basic surgical kit that looked like it had been assembled in the 1990s. It would have to be enough. She tore open her uniform blouse with shaking hands. The entry wound was a ragged hole just below her ribs, about the size of a quarter. The exit wound was somewhere behind her, and she couldn't see it, but she could feel it, a hot throbbing that radiated down her spine. The shrapnel had passed through cleanly, which meant no fragments to remove, but it also meant a through and through that was bleeding from both sides. Elena grabbed a packet of Quick Clot and tore it open with her teeth. The powder spilled across her hands. She pressed it directly into the wound, packing it as deep as she could with fingers that had started to go numb. The chemical reaction began immediately, a burning sensation that was somehow worse than the wound itself. She screamed into her sleeve, biting down on the fabric until her jaw ached. The thigh wound was different. She could see the fragment there, a twisted piece of steel about the size of her thumb, embedded in the meat of her outer quadriceps. It had to come out, no choice. She pulled off her belt and looped it around her leg just above the wound, pulling it tight enough to slow the bleeding. Then she looked around for something to use as forceps. The multi-tool on Sergeant Wade Garrett's belt would have to do. He'd been 34 years old, married, 2 kids, and now he was lying face down in the dirt with 3 bullets in his back. She didn't have time to be sorry. She took the multi-tool, flipped open the pliers, and held them over the small fire still burning in the remains of a fuel can. 10 seconds. 20. When she pulled them out, the metal was glowing faintly in the morning light. Elena took a breath, held it. Then she dug into her own leg. The pain was white and absolute. It wiped out thought, wiped out training, wiped out everything except the animal need to make it stop. She heard someone screaming and realized distantly that it was her. The shrapnel resisted, caught on something, maybe bone, maybe tendon. She pulled harder. It came free all at once, and blood followed in a hot rush that soaked through her pants and into the dirt. She dropped the fragment and grabbed another quick clot packet, tearing it open and packing the wound before she could pass out. The tourniquet came next. She pulled it tight enough to hurt, then tighter still until the bleeding slowed to a seep. Her leg looked wrong below the tourniquet, pale and mottled, but it would hold for now. It had to hold. The IV was harder. Her veins had started to collapse, and her hands were shaking so badly that she missed the first stick, and the second. The third time she got it, taping the line in place with trembling fingers. The saline bag hung from a piece of broken antenna, dripping slowly into her arm. It wouldn't be enough to replace what she'd lost, but it might buy her another hour, maybe 2. Only when the IV started dripping did she allow herself 30 seconds of rest, head against the warm metal, breathing measured. The morphine called to her from the med ruck. She left it untouched. She'd need clarity for what came next. The radio crackled again. This time she could reach it. Sergeant Garrett's body was still warm when she rolled him over to take the handset from his vest. She keyed the mic, listening to the squelch of empty channels, cycling through frequencies until she found one with traffic. Voices. Not English. Something else. Arabic, maybe. She was about to move on when she heard something that made her freeze. Ares 6, this is Ares 2. Target zone secure. Counting 14 enemy KIA. No friendly casualties. The accent was American. South Carolina, maybe Georgia. She knew that drawl. She'd heard it before, at Fort Bragg, in the team rooms and the chow halls. That was a contractor, a private military operator, and he was calling the ambush zone secure. Copy, Ares 2, another American voice replied. Female target unconfirmed. Sweep the perimeter and verify kill. Phase 2 proceeds at 1800 hours. Female target. They were looking for someone specific, looking for her. Elena keyed through more frequencies, found another conversation, this one more encrypted, but still audible. Convoy Bravo 2 is redirected to Route Scorpion. Proceed as planned. Route Scorpion. She knew that name. It was an alternate supply route that ran parallel to Highway 7, threading through the mountains east of the valley. It had been marked on the briefing maps as unverified, use with caution, because the Syrian army had operated there during the Civil War, and the Syrian army loved their landmines. Nobody used Scorpion unless they had no choice. She grabbed the tactical map from Garrett's cargo pocket and spread it across her knees. Route Scorpion was marked in red pencil, a winding line that cut through the high ground. Marked alongside it, in smaller print that looked like it had been added later, Minefield, unknown density, last swept 2015. That was 8 years ago. Mines didn't age out, they just waited. The convoy was being redirected directly into a minefield. Someone had planned this, someone on the inside, someone who knew exactly where to hit them and how to make it look like bad luck. Elena felt something cold settle into her chest. Not fear, something harder. She'd been left behind to die in the dirt while her convoy drove straight into a kill zone, and whoever was responsible thought she'd be too dead to do anything about it. They were wrong. She keyed Garrett's radio to the convoy frequency and tried to transmit. Static. She tried again. Nothing. They were jamming her, which meant they knew she was alive, and they didn't want her talking to anyone. That was fine. She'd work with it. Elena pulled herself to her feet again, using the MRAP for support. Her legs screamed in protest, but it held. She looked at the map again, calculating distances and time. The convoy was probably 40 minutes ahead of her by now, moving at standard tactical speed through open terrain. Route Scorpion was another 3 hours beyond that, which meant she had maybe 5 hours before they reached the minefield. 5 hours to cover 12 kilometers of hostile territory with a hole in her abdomen and a leg that was barely functional. 5 hours to figure out who'd sold them out and how to stop them. 5 hours to decide whether the men who'd left her to die were worth saving. She grabbed Garrett's rifle and checked the magazine. 4 rounds left. She took his sidearm too, and his spare magazines, and the 3 grenades clipped to his vest. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had 5 minutes ago. She stuffed the tactical map into her cargo pocket, along with the morphine injector she'd been avoiding. For later, when the pain got bad enough that dying seemed preferable to taking another step. The abandoned supply depot was visible on the ridge above her, a cluster of half-collapsed buildings that had probably been a Syrian army outpost before the civil war turned the whole country into a graveyard. It would give her elevation and line of sight. If she could make it that far, she could see the convoy's route, maybe even get ahead of them. Elena started walking. Each step was a negotiation with her body. Left foot forward, right foot forward. Breathe. Don't think about the blood. Don't think about the distance. Think about Bradock's face when she'd pulled him from the fire. Think about Vance trying to get her on that helicopter. Think about the men in that convoy, good men, who didn't know they were being led to slaughter by someone they trusted. She'd made it maybe 200 meters when she heard the vehicles. Not friendly. Too fast. Too aggressive. The sound of engines being pushed hard over rough terrain. She dropped flat behind a cluster of rocks and watched through a gap as 3 technical trucks roared past, heading toward the ambush site. Each truck carried 4 men. Not Syrian army, not ISIS. These men wore matching tactical gear, carried matching rifles, moved with a kind of precision that only came from training and money. She caught sight of a patch on the lead truck's bumper, a red sword over a black shield. Ares Tactical Solutions. The same contractors she'd heard on the radio. They were coming back to finish the job. One of the trucks slowed as it passed her position. A man stood in the bed, scanning the terrain with binoculars. Elena held her breath and pressed herself flat against the rock. He was looking right at her, through her, past her. She was covered in dirt and blood, and against the desert hardpack, she was just another shadow. He said something to the driver, and the truck accelerated again, following the others toward the kill zone. When they were gone, Elena continued her climb. The ridge was steeper than it had looked from below. Loose scree that gave way under her boots and sent her sliding backward every 3rd step. Her hands were raw. Her leg was a constant scream. The IV bag had run dry, and she'd left it behind, just another piece of trash in a desert full of trash. By the time she reached the depot, the sun was high and merciless. The buildings were exactly as bad as she'd expected. Walls with holes, roofs collapsed inward, floors covered in broken glass and spent shell casings. But there was shade, and there was water. An old cistern in the corner of what had been a supply room, still half full of rainwater that tasted like rust and dust and survival. She drank until her stomach cramped, then filled Garrett's canteens and drank again. There was something else in the ruins, a weapons cache. Not military issue, too clean, too recent. Someone had been using this place. She found an RPG launcher with 2 rounds, a dozen AK-47 magazines still sealed in plastic, and a tactical tablet in a waterproof case. The tablet was locked, but the lock was civilian grade. She had it cracked in under a minute. What she found inside made her forget about the pain in her gut and the fire in her leg. Files, dozens of them, convoy routes, personnel manifests, bank transfers, communication logs. Everything was labeled with military precision, sorted by date and operation code. The most recent folder was marked Operation Clean Sweep, Asset H6 confirmed. She opened it. The first file was a photograph. Captain Marcus Hayward shaking hands with a man in civilian clothes. The man's jacket had a patch visible on the shoulder. Red sword over black shield. Ares Tactical Solutions. Behind them, a briefcase sat open on a table. Elena could see the cash, neatly banded stacks that added up to more than Hayward made in 5 years. The second file was a route map, their convoy's route, with 3 red X's marked along the path. The ambush site was the first X. Route Scorpion was the second. The third was labeled simply Disposal. The third file was a ledger, bank transfers. $340,000, wired in 6 installments over 3 months. The last transfer was dated 3 days ago. The memo line read, Route Compromise plus Disposal. Elena felt something crack open inside her chest. Not surprise, not even anger. Just a cold, clear understanding that the man who'd ordered her left behind had sold them all out for the cost of a decent house in the suburbs. The fourth file was the one that changed everything. It was a target list. 7 names highlighted in red. 6 she didn't recognize. Supply sergeants, logistics officers, people who wouldn't be missed right away. The 7th name she knew by heart. Master Chief Garrett Vance. He wasn't collateral damage. He was the primary target. Everything else, the ambush, the convoy, the minefield, all of it was built around killing one man. A man who was 3 weeks from retirement and probably wanted nothing more than to see his grandchildren grow up. She opened the attached file. It was a report written in the flat military prose that turned lives into bullet points. Vance had discovered discrepancies in the supply manifests. Small things at first. Medical supplies that went missing. Ammunition that never arrived. He'd started asking questions. Started keeping records. And 3 days ago, he'd sent a message to the Inspector General's office requesting a formal investigation into Captain Marcus Hayward's logistics operations. 3 days ago, the same day Hayward had received his final payment. Elena sat there in the ruins with the tablet on her knees and the sun beating down through the broken roof. The convoy had maybe 4 hours before they reached the minefield. She had maybe 3 hours before blood loss made her too weak to move. And somewhere out there, Ares Tactical Solutions was hunting her with orders to confirm the kill. She could activate her emergency beacon. It was in her vest, intact, still functional. She could call for help and be on a helicopter within the hour. Let someone else handle it. Let the proper authorities investigate. Let the system work. But the system was what had left her here. The system was what had put a price on Vance's head. And the system was what had allowed men like Hayward to turn service into profit and loyalty into a commodity. Elena pulled out the morphine injector and stared at it for a long moment. Then she put it back. Not yet. She wasn't done. Not even close. She strapped the RPG to her back and loaded her pockets with magazines. The tablet went into her cargo pocket, wrapped in plastic from the weapons cache. She checked Garrett's rifle one more time, chambered around, and started moving east toward the high ground overlooking Route Scorpion. The convoy would reach the minefield in 4 hours. She'd reach the overwatch position in 3. And when she got there, she'd have a choice to make. The kind of choice that didn't come with right answers, only consequences. Behind her, the Ares trucks were sweeping the ambush site, looking for her body. Ahead of her, 24 men were driving toward death without knowing it. And somewhere in between, she had to figure out how to save the people who decided she wasn't worth saving. Elena Thornburg had been told her entire career that women didn't belong in combat, that they couldn't hack it, that they'd get someone killed. She'd proved them wrong every single time, but now, bleeding and alone in the Syrian desert, with enemies on all sides, and a convoy of men who'd left her to die, she had to prove something else. She had to prove that being a SEAL meant something more than just surviving. It meant finishing the mission. Even when the mission was saving the people who'd abandoned you. Even when every logical part of your brain was screaming that they deserved what was coming. Even when the pain was so bad that dying seemed easier than taking another step. Master Chief Vance had taught her that. He'd been the one instructor at BUD/S who'd never questioned whether she belonged. He just made her prove it, over and over, until proving it became automatic, until the idea of quitting was more painful than the actual pain. She remembered his voice during Hell Week, when she'd been in the surf zone for the 4th hour, and hypothermia was turning her thoughts to fog. Pain is just information, Thornbird. Your body telling you where the limits are. The question isn't whether it hurts. The question is what you do with that information. She'd stayed in the surf. She'd finished the evolution. She'd earned the trident. Now she was going to earn it again. The high ground rose ahead of her, jagged and unforgiving under the afternoon sun. Elena adjusted the rifle sling on her shoulder and started climbing. Each step was information. Her body was telling her to stop, to rest, to give in. She processed that information and kept moving. Because somewhere ahead, Master Chief Garrett Vance was riding in a convoy toward a minefield. And he didn't know that the man giving the orders had already decided he was dead. And somewhere behind her, the men who'd left her bleeding in the dirt thought she was too weak to matter. They were about to learn different. The ridgeline cut across the horizon like a serrated blade, all sharp edges and loose scree that gave way under Elena's boots with every third step. The sun had passed its apex and was beginning its slow descent toward the western mountains, turning the sky into hammered copper. She'd been climbing for 90 minutes, and her body was starting to send signals that couldn't be ignored much longer. The tourniquet on her thigh had gone from painful to numb, which meant tissue damage was accumulating. The quick clot in her abdomen had stopped the external bleeding, but she could feel something shifting inside, something warm and wrong that suggested internal bleeding the field dressing couldn't reach. She stopped at a flat outcropping and allowed herself 60 seconds, not to rest, to assess. The tactical tablet showed the convoy's progress as a blue dot moving steadily east along Highway 7. They were making good time, which was the problem. Another 2 hours, and they'd reach the junction where Hayward would redirect them onto Route Scorpion. Another hour after that, and they'd be in the minefield. She was still 4 kilometers from the overwatch position she'd identified on the map, a ridge that would give her direct line of sight to both the convoy route and the minefield approaches. 4 kilometers. In her current condition, that was 90 minutes of brutal movement, maybe 2 hours if the terrain turned worse, which meant she'd arrive with maybe 30 minutes to spare. 30 minutes to figure out how to stop a convoy from entering a minefield when her radio was jammed and she had no way to make contact. 30 minutes to decide if she was going to take the shot that would solve everything and damn her soul in the process. Because there was always the shot. Hayward's vehicle would be in range. 1 round, center mass, and the conspiracy died with him. The convoy would stop. Someone else would take command. They'd probably turn around, call for orders, avoid the minefield entirely through sheer bureaucratic caution. Problem solved. Mission accomplished. All it would cost was the line she'd sworn never to cross. Elena pushed herself upright and kept climbing. The shot was the easy answer. She'd find a harder one. The terrain changed as she gained elevation. The loose scree gave way to harder stone, which was easier on her footing, but exposed her to anyone watching from below. She moved in short bursts, using whatever cover she could find, always conscious of the sight lines and the angles. This was Indian country now. Ares Tactical knew she was alive, knew she was mobile, and they'd be hunting. 3 vehicles, 12 men, all of them professionals who'd done this work for money long enough to be very good at it. She spotted the first truck 20 minutes later. It was moving slowly along the base of the ridge, following her general direction but not her specific path. They were casting a wide net, searching for signs, blood trails, disturbed earth, the kinds of mistakes that wounded, desperate people made when they thought they were alone. Elena had made it a point not to leave those signs. Every time she'd stopped to rest, she'd taken 30 seconds to obscure her tracks. Every time she'd bled through her dressing, she'd buried the soiled bandages under rocks. Old habits from SEER school: survive, evade, resist, escape, in that order. The truck stopped directly below her position. A man climbed out of the passenger side and stood there scanning the ridge with binoculars. He was tall, lean, moving with the economical grace of someone who'd spent a career in hard places. Elena went absolutely still. She was 60 meters above him, lying flat against stone that was nearly the same color as her blood-stained uniform. At this distance, motion was the enemy. Even breathing could give her away if he was good enough. He was good enough. The binoculars swept past her position, came back, held. She could feel his attention like a physical weight. Her hand moved slowly, incrementally, toward the pistol on her hip. If he spotted her, she'd have maybe 2 seconds before he called it in. 2 seconds to drop him and run before the other 11 converged on her position. The math wasn't good, but math had stopped mattering somewhere around the time she'd pulled shrapnel out of her own leg. The man lowered his binoculars and said something to the driver. The truck started moving again, continuing east. He hadn't seen her. Or he had seen her and decided a shadow on a rock wasn't worth investigating. Either way, she'd bought herself another 30 minutes. Elena waited until the truck disappeared around a bend before she moved again. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from blood loss and dehydration, and the simple fact that the human body wasn't designed to function with this much damage. She drank from Garrett's canteen, forcing down water that her stomach didn't want. Then she pulled out the tablet and checked the convoy's position again. They'd stopped. All 8 vehicles, stationary at a position that matched the Highway 7 junction. This was it. This was where Hayward would make his pitch. Some excuse about road conditions or intelligence reports or tactical necessity. Some reason why they needed to deviate from the planned route and take Scorpion instead. And the convoy would follow, because that's what convoys did. They followed orders. Elena zoomed in on the satellite overlay. The minefield started approximately 3 kilometers past the junction, in a narrow valley where the road threaded between 2 ridgelines. Perfect terrain for an ambush, which was why the Syrian army had mined it in the first place. The mines were marked on old maps as Soviet-era PMN-2s, anti-personnel devices designed to maim rather than kill. Step on one and it would take your foot off at the ankle. Drive over one and it would shred your tires and immobilize your vehicle. Either way, you'd be stuck in the kill zone while the enemy had all the time in the world to finish you off. Except there was no enemy anymore. The Syrian army was long gone from this sector. ISIS had been pushed out 6 months ago. The only threat in that valley was the mines themselves, and the man who was deliberately driving a convoy into them. She pushed herself up and continued climbing. The pain had transcended description now. It was just a constant presence, like tinnitus or the ringing in her ears from the explosions. Background noise. Irrelevant. What mattered was the ridgeline ahead, and the time running out, and the fact that 24 men were about to die because someone had decided Garrett Vance knew too much. The overwatch position was everything she'd hoped for and nothing she'd wanted. A natural rock formation that gave her clear sight lines down into the valley where Route Scorpion ran. She could see the road, empty and waiting. She could see the minefield, invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look, but obvious to her now that she knew what she was seeing. The spacing was too regular. The vegetation patterns were wrong. There were gaps in the rock distribution that suggested human placement rather than natural scatter. And she could see the convoy, still stopped at the junction 2 kilometers away. Elena set up in a prone position behind the rocks and pulled out Garrett's rifle. The optic was a basic ACOG, 4-power magnification, good enough for the ranges she'd be working with. She ranged the junction, 1,800 meters. Extreme range for this weapon system, but doable in these conditions. Clear air, no wind, stable position. She could make the shot. The question was whether she should. Through the scope, she could see figures moving between the vehicles. Arguments, discussions. Someone, probably Vance, was questioning the route change. She could read it in the body language, the gestures, the way the other men were gathering around. Hayward would be in the center of it, selling his lie with the confidence of a man who'd already been paid. Elena's finger found the trigger. 2 pounds of pressure and Hayward's problems would be over. So would hers. Clean shot, righteous kill, problem solved. Justice served with a 5.56 millimeter messenger traveling at 3,000 feet per second. She exhaled slowly and took her finger off the trigger. Not yet. There had to be another way. Had to be. Because the moment she took that shot, she became what Hayward was. Someone who killed fellow service members to solve a problem. The justification might be better, but the act was the same. And she hadn't spent 8 years earning the trident just to throw it away on a revenge killing, no matter how much that revenge was deserved. The tablet had a communication function, encrypted messaging, satellite uplink, the kind of technology that contractors used when they needed to coordinate across distances without relying on military infrastructure. She opened it and started scrolling through the contact list. Dozens of names, none of them familiar. Call signs and numbers and operational designations that meant nothing to her. Then she found one that did. Vance, primary target, verify before disposal. They'd put him in their system, logged him like inventory. That's how professional this was. That's how far the corruption had spread. These weren't rogue operators acting on impulse. This was an organized operation with planning and oversight and quality control. They even had a checklist. Elena opened the message interface and typed, Vance target compromised, female witness eliminated, proceeding phase 2, confirm. She hit send and waited. The response came back in 40 seconds. Confirmed. Execute phase 2 at 1800 hours. 0 survivors. 0 survivors. They weren't just killing Vance. They were killing everyone. The whole convoy. 24 men turned into casualties, blamed on a minefield that everyone would assume was just bad luck. And somewhere, someone would file the paperwork and close the investigation, and life would go on. Elena checked her watch. 17:20 hours. 40 minutes until execution. The convoy was starting to move again, turning onto Route Scorpion, following Hayward toward the valley. She could see them through the scope now, 8 vehicles in a staggered column, maintaining proper intervals, doing everything right except trusting the wrong man. The Ares truck appeared on the northern ridge, then another on the southern ridge. They were setting up overwatch positions. When the convoy hit the minefield, Ares would be in position to engage any survivors. A crossfire that would leave nothing alive. Thorough, professional, exactly the kind of operation that required planning and coordination, and the kind of money that only moved in 6-figure increments. Elena pulled out the RPG and checked the rounds. 2 shots. Tandem heat warheads designed to punch through armor. Devastating against vehicles, less useful against infantry, but she wasn't planning to fight infantry. She was planning to stop trucks. The Ares vehicles were thin-skinned technicals, modified civilian trucks with heavy weapons mounted in the bed. One good hit and they'd be done. She ranged the northern truck. 1,200 meters. Long shot for an RPG, but the terrain gave her the angle she needed. High position, target below, gravity assist on the trajectory. She could make it work. Had to make it work. Because once the convoy entered the minefield, those trucks would open fire, and none of her people would survive the crossfire. Her people. When had she started thinking of them that way again? They'd left her, abandoned her, decided she wasn't worth saving. But they were still hers, still her responsibility. Because being a SEAL wasn't about who saved you. It was about who you saved when nobody was watching. The convoy was 500 meters from the minefield entrance. Elena could see it clearly now through the scope. The first pressure plate would be right about where the road curved left, around the boulder cluster. Big enough to hide the mine, solid enough to funnel the vehicles directly over it. Hayward would know exactly where it was, would probably accelerate slightly as they approached, making sure the lead vehicle had enough momentum to trigger the detonation. 400 meters. The lead vehicle was moving at steady speed, maintaining interval. She could see the driver clearly now. Young kid, maybe 22, focused on the road ahead, doing his job, following orders, about to die because the man in the vehicle behind him had sold his life for cash. 300 meters. Elena shifted her aim to Hayward's vehicle, second in line, right where a convoy commander should be, close enough to control the formation, far enough back to survive the initial explosion. Through the scope, she could see him in the passenger seat, relaxed, confident, checking his watch, probably counting down the seconds until his problem solved itself and his retirement fund was secure. 200 meters. Her finger touched the trigger again. This was it. Last chance. Take the shot or commit to the harder path. Kill the traitor or save the victims. Justice or mercy. The choice that defined whether she was still the person who'd earned the trident or someone else entirely. The radio crackled. Not her radio, the one she'd taken from Garrett's body. Someone was transmitting on the convoy frequency, close enough for the signal to punch through the jamming. All units, this is Vance. Something's wrong. I need everyone to stop. Stop now. The convoy didn't stop. Hayward's voice cut in immediately, calm and authoritative. Negative, Gunny. We're behind schedule. Keep moving. Captain, I'm seeing irregularities in the terrain. This area isn't clear. It's clear, Vance. Intel confirmed it 3 days ago. Then Intel is wrong. I'm seeing signature patterns that match. Master Chief, you're retired in 6 hours. Let me do my job. 100 meters. The lead vehicle was almost at the curve, almost at the mine. Elena could see Vance in one of the rear vehicles, standing up through the roof hatch, binoculars to his face, scanning the terrain with the kind of intensity that came from 3 decades of staying alive in places that wanted you dead. He knew. Somehow, he knew. Maybe it was the terrain. Maybe it was the way Hayward was acting. Maybe it was just the instinct that kept good soldiers alive and got bad ones killed. But he knew something was wrong, and nobody was listening. 50 meters. Elena made her choice. She swung the RPG onto her shoulder, aimed at the Northern Aries truck, and fired. The backblast kicked up a storm of dust behind her position. The round streaked downrange, a smoke trail that drew a perfect line from her position to the target. Impact came 2 seconds later. The truck exploded in a fireball that sent debris spinning into the air and bodies tumbling across the rocks. She didn't wait to admire the shot. She was already loading the second round, already swinging toward the southern truck. The element of surprise was gone. They knew where she was now, but they didn't know what she was going to do next. And in that uncertainty was her advantage. The second truck was moving, trying to relocate, trying to get out of her line of fire. She led the target, calculated the intercept, and fired. This shot was harder. Moving target, longer range, her position compromised. The round went wide by 3 meters and detonated against the rocks behind the truck. Close enough to get their attention, not close enough to stop them. The convoy had stopped. All 8 vehicles, emergency halt, exactly 50 meters from the minefield entrance. Vance had used the explosions as justification to override Hayward's orders. Smart, but it wouldn't hold. In about 30 seconds, Hayward would regain control, would demand they continue, and Vance wouldn't have a good enough reason to refuse. Elena grabbed the radio and keyed the mic. The jamming was still active, but she was close enough now that brute force might punch through. Convoy Bravo 2, this is Thornbird. Urgent. Static. Then a voice, young and shocked. Thornbird! Oh my God, you're alive! It was Kessler, the junior medic, the one who'd hesitated. Elena didn't have time for emotion. Route Scorpion is mined. Repeat, you are 50 meters from an active minefield. Stop all forward movement. Hayward's voice cut in, sharp with authority. Unverified transmission. Disregard. All units continue movement. Elena zoomed her scope onto the curve in the road. She could see the pressure plate now, knew where it was, knew what would happen if that lead vehicle rolled over it. Vance, check your map. Grid coordinates, Tango, Foxtrot, 7, 9er. Soviet PM N2 field. In place 2015, never cleared. Silence. Then Vance's voice, measured and calm. Thornbird, we thought you were KIA. How did you get those coordinates? From the tablet of the Ares contractor who was sent to confirm my death. The same contractors who are being paid to make sure none of you leave this valley alive. More silence. She could imagine the scene inside those vehicles. Confusion. Disbelief. The cognitive dissonance of hearing a dead woman on the radio telling them their commanding officer was trying to kill them. Hayward tried to regain control. She's delirious, hallucinating from blood loss. Ignore her and continue movement. Captain, Vance said slowly, I'm pulling up the route map now. Thornbird, where did you say those coordinates were? Elena gave them again, waited, counted the seconds. Captain Hayward, Vance's voice had changed, gone flat, the tone of a man who just had his worst suspicions confirmed. Why isn't this minefield marked on our current map? Because it's been cleared. I told you, Intel verified. Intel verified nothing. I'm looking at a Syrian Army tactical map from 2015. Those coordinates are marked as active mines, PMN2S, just like Thornbird said. Now, why the hell are we 50 meters from a minefield that's not on our operational maps? The radio went quiet. Elena could almost hear Hayward's mind working, trying to find an explanation that didn't end with him in handcuffs. When he spoke again, his voice was different, harder, the voice of a man who'd run out of options and decided to go all in. Master Chief Vance, you're relieved of duty effective immediately. Medical concerns. All units, continue movement on my order. Like hell I'm relieved. Everyone stay where you are until we... The sound of a gunshot cut through the radio, then another, then screaming, then silence. Elena's blood went cold. Through the scope, she could see chaos in the convoy. Soldiers jumping from vehicles, weapons up, taking cover, but not from external threats, from each other. Hayward had shown his hand, had pulled his weapon, had probably shot Vance, and was now using the contractors embedded in the convoy to maintain control through force. Kessler's voice came back on the radio, shaking with fear. Thornbird, Hayward just shot Master Chief Vance. He's got 3 contractors with him. They're holding the drivers at gunpoint. They're forcing us forward into the minefield. Elena watched through the scope as Hayward's vehicle pushed forward, nudging the lead Humvee from behind. The soldiers had weapons but couldn't use them. Not in this formation. Not with friendlies in the line of fire. Hayward knew that, was counting on it. He'd gone from covert operation to overt hostage situation in the span of 30 seconds. And now he was betting that nobody would shoot through their own people to stop him. He was probably right, which meant Elena had about 2 minutes before the lead vehicle crossed into the minefield, triggered the first mine, and created enough chaos for the remaining Ares contractors to finish the job. She grabbed the radio. Kessler, how bad is Vance hit? Shoulder wound. He's alive but bleeding. Thornbird, what do we do? Tell me exactly where Hayward is. Second vehicle, passenger seat. He's got his sidearm on the driver. 2 contractors in the back seat. The 3rd contractor is in the lead vehicle, forcing that driver forward. Elena ranged the 2nd vehicle, 1,400 meters. Hayward would be on the right side, the driver on the left, two contractors in back. A shot through the passenger window would go through Hayward and potentially into one of the contractors. Two problems solved with one bullet. Clean, efficient, murder. She moved her finger to the trigger, held it there. This was different from the shot she'd refused to take earlier. This was active threat, hostile force. Hayward had crossed the line from corrupt officer to active combatant the moment he'd pulled that trigger on Vance. This was a righteous kill, legally defensible, morally justifiable. Everything she needed to take the shot without losing herself in the process. Except for one thing, Bradock, the private she'd pulled from the fire. The 19-year-old kid who'd survived the ambush because she'd carried him 40 meters through hell. He was in that convoy, probably in one of the vehicles near the front. When the shooting started, when the contractors opened fire, when the chaos reached its peak, that kid would be caught in the crossfire. She took her finger off the trigger. Again, because saving Vance by getting Bradock killed wasn't salvation. It was just trading one death for another, and she was done with that math. Kessler, I need you to listen very carefully. Can you see the minefield from your position? No, just the road ahead. But I can. I'm on the ridge with direct line of sight. I can guide you through. Through? Thornbird, you want us to drive into a minefield? I want you to survive the next 5 minutes. The only way that happens is if you do exactly what I tell you, exactly when I tell you. Can you do that? A pause, then. You're asking me to trust you. I'm asking you to trust that I didn't crawl across 8 clicks of desert with a hole in my gut just to let you die in a minefield. Another pause, longer this time. Elena could hear voices in the background, arguments, someone saying this was crazy, someone else saying they didn't have a choice. Then Kessler came back on, her voice steadier than before. Okay, we're listening. What do you need? First thing, tell me who's driving the lead vehicle. Private First Class Danny Morrison, 20 years old, from Ohio. Is he listening? He is now. Morrison, this is Chief Thornbird. Have you ever been through a breach lane before? The kid's voice was shaking. No, Chief. That's okay, you're about to learn. I'm going to talk you through this step by step. I need you to trust my instructions and follow them exactly. No hesitation, no second guessing. Can you do that? The contractor has a gun to my head. I know, and in about 30 seconds, that's not going to matter. Because either you follow my instructions and we all survive, or you don't and we all die. Those are the only two options. So I'm going to ask you again, can you do this? A long pause, then. Yes, Chief, I can do this. Good. Now here's what's going to happen. On my mark, you're going to hit the brakes. Hard. Emergency stop. The contractor is going to go forward into the dash. That's when you take his weapon and secure him. Copy? Copy. Elena shifted her scope to the road ahead, found the pressure plate, calculated the distance. Morrison, you've got 15 meters before the first mine. On my mark. 3, 2, 1. Mark. Through the scope, she saw the lead Humvee's brake lights flare. The vehicle stopped hard. The contractor in the passenger seat slammed into the dashboard, just like she'd predicted. Morrison moved fast, grabbing for the weapon, getting into a struggle. The vehicle rocked with the fight inside. Hayward's voice on the radio screaming, "Keep moving! All vehicles advance!" Elena ignored him. Morrison's status? Got him. Weapon secured. Outstanding. Now listen carefully. I'm going to guide you around the first mine. When I say go, you're going to steer hard right, 30 degrees. Hold that angle for exactly 2 meters, then straighten out. Ready? Ready. Go. The Humvee moved right, slow, controlled, exactly as she'd instructed. It missed the pressure plate by maybe 18 inches. Close enough that Elena could see the mine through her scope, partially buried, waiting for weight that never came. Straighten out, Good, now stop. You're clear of the first one. Behind the lead vehicle, chaos was erupting. Hayward was screaming orders that nobody was following. The contractors in his vehicle had their weapons up, trying to maintain control. But the other soldiers were starting to realize what was happening, starting to understand that their commanding officer was trying to kill them. The math was shifting. Kessler came back on. Thornbird, we've got 4 soldiers in the rear vehicles. They're ready to move on your signal. Negative. Everyone stays in their vehicles. If we start a firefight now, half the convoy drives into mines trying to take cover. We're going to walk out of this. Literally, one vehicle at a time. Kessler, who's driving your vehicle? I am. Can you see Morrison's brake lights? Yes. Stay exactly 5 meters behind him. Match his movements exactly. When he goes right, you go right. When he stops, you stop. Understand? Understood. Elena started talking Morrison forward again, meter by meter, mine by mine. The field was dense here, pressure plates every 10 to 15 meters, staggered pattern designed to catch vehicles trying to weave. She could see them all from her elevated position, could plot a path that threaded between them like a needle through cloth. But it was slow work, painful work. Every instruction had to be precise. Every movement had to be perfect. One mistake and Morrison would be the first name on a casualty list that wouldn't stop until it hit 24. They'd made it maybe 50 meters into the field when the Ares truck on the southern ridge opened fire. Heavy machine gun, probably a Browning M2, sending 50 caliber rounds screaming down into the valley. The rounds hit all around the convoy, kicking up geysers of dirt and rock. One punched through the hood of the 4th vehicle. Another shattered a windshield. The soldiers were scrambling for cover, but there was no cover. Just the road and the mines, and the absolute certainty that moving off the road meant death. Elena swung her rifle toward the Ares position and fired 3 quick shots. Suppressive fire. She wasn't trying to hit anything at this range, just make them keep their heads down. Make them think twice about exposing themselves. Buy Morrison another 30 seconds to get to the next waypoint. Morrison, don't stop. Keep moving. Hard left, 20 degrees, 3 meters. The kid did it, hands steady despite the machine gun fire, despite the chaos, despite every instinct screaming at him to floor it and try to outrun the bullets. He trusted her instructions and moved exactly as she told him. The Humvee missed the next mine by inches. Hayward's vehicle was still trying to push forward, but the other vehicles had stopped following his orders. They were following Elena's voice instead, following the dead woman who'd come back to save them. The contractors in Hayward's vehicle were realizing the same thing Elena had realized 20 minutes ago. They'd lost control of the situation. Their careful plan had fallen apart the moment she'd put an RPG round into their overwatch position. The machine gun opened up again. This time the rounds walked right up the road toward Morrison's vehicle. Elena saw the tracers coming, saw where they'd hit, knew Morrison had maybe 2 seconds before 50 caliber rounds started shredding his Humvee like paper. She didn't think, just moved, swung her rifle onto the Ares position and started firing. Rapid, aimed shots. 1,800 meters was extreme range for this weapon, but she wasn't trying to make kill shots. Just hitting close enough to make them flinch, make them duck, make them choose between maintaining fire discipline and not getting their heads taken off. It worked. The machine gun went silent. Morrison kept moving. Right again, 45 degrees, 4 meters, then stop. They were halfway through now. 8 vehicles with maybe another 100 meters of minefield ahead. At this rate, it would take another 20 minutes to get everyone clear. 20 minutes of walking vehicles through a pattern only she could see, while Ares contractors tried to kill them all from elevated positions, while Hayward tried to regain control, while her body continued its slow shutdown from blood loss and trauma. 20 minutes. She could do 20 minutes. Had to do 20 minutes. Because the alternative was letting them die, and she'd already decided that wasn't an option. Morrison was moving again, following her instructions. threading between pressure plates with a kind of precision that suggested he'd found his calm center in the middle of chaos. Good for him. That's what training was supposed to do. Turn panic into process, fear into focus. Vance's voice came over the radio, weak but clear. "Thornbird, this is Vance. I'm still operational. What do you need?" Relief flooded through her. "Gunny, you're supposed to be bleeding out. I've been shot before. Takes more than one round to keep me down." "Sit rep?" "I'm walking them through the minefield, but we've got Ares on the southern ridge with a Ma Deuce. I can suppress them, but I can't eliminate them from this range. They're going to get brave again soon." "I can take care of that. Give me coordinates." Elena passed them, heard movement over the radio. Vance was climbing out of his vehicle, despite the shoulder wound, despite his age, getting into position to engage a target that was probably 1,000 meters from his position. The old man was going to get himself killed trying to help. But that was what you did. That was what being a SEAL meant. You helped until you couldn't help anymore, and then you helped some more. The machine gun opened up again, but this time it was answered immediately by precise rifle fire from the convoy. Vance had found his mark. The machine gun went silent again, this time for good. Elena saw figures retreating from the southern position, dragging a body with them. The old man had just dropped an Ares contractor at 1,000 meters with a shoulder wound and probably a rifle he'd never zeroed. Some things you didn't lose. Some skills stayed in the blood. "Morrison, you're doing great. Keep it up. Left turn, 30 degrees, 5 meters. They were 3/4 through now. Elena could see the end of the minefield, where the road straightened out and the vegetation patterns returned to normal. Another 10 minutes, maybe less. They were going to make it. All of them. Despite Hayward, despite Ares, despite the fact that she'd been left to die in the dirt 8 hours ago. That's when Hayward made his final play. She saw it through the scope. Hayward stepping out of his vehicle, pistol in hand, walking toward the lead Humvee with the cold purpose of a man who decided that if he couldn't win, nobody could. The contractors with him followed, weapons up, creating a firing line. They were going to execute Morrison, going to shoot the driver and send the vehicle careening off the road into the mines, turn the whole convoy into a catastrophe that would be blamed on bad luck and bad intelligence, and nobody would ever know the truth. Elena shifted her scope onto Hayward, centered the crosshairs on his chest. Her finger found the trigger. This time there was no hesitation, no moral calculus, no weighing of options. He'd made his choice. Now she'd make hers. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. 1,400 meters. Wind negligible. Elevation compensated. The round took 2 seconds to arrive. 2 seconds during which Hayward kept walking, kept moving toward Morrison's vehicle, kept being the man who'd sold out his convoy for cash. Then the round hit. Not center mass, she'd been aiming for the chest, but blood loss and exhaustion had pulled the shot low and left. The bullet took him in the hip, spun him around, dropped him to the road. Not a kill shot, but enough to stop him, enough to end his play. The contractors froze. One of them started to raise his weapon toward Morrison's vehicle. Vance dropped him with a single shot before he could complete the motion. The other contractor threw down his weapon and put his hands up. Smart. Survival instinct overriding loyalty. That's what happened when the money stopped being worth the risk. Elena keyed the radio. "Morrison, Hayward is down. The contractors are surrendering. Keep moving. We're almost home." And they were. 10 more minutes of careful navigation. 10 more minutes of step-by-step instructions. 10 more minutes of proving that the woman they'd left to die was the only reason they were still alive. When the last vehicle cleared the minefield and rolled onto safe ground, Elena let her head drop to the rock. Her vision was tunneling. Her hands were numb. The pain had gone from acute to a kind of distant throb that suggested her body was shutting down non-essential systems to preserve the core. She'd done what she came to do. Now she could rest. Except there was still one more thing. One more detail that needed handling. She pulled out the tablet and opened the message interface. Typed, Phase 2 complete. All targets eliminated. Awaiting extraction coordinates. The response came back in 30 seconds. Outstanding work. Extraction team inbound your position. ETA 20 minutes. Elena smiled. Sent back. Copy. Standing by. Then she forwarded the entire conversation to Colonel Hendricks at Base Command, along with every file on the tablet. The evidence, the bank transfers, the target lists, everything Ares Tactical Solutions had been stupid enough to document in writing. In 20 minutes, when their extraction team arrived at her position, they'd find a Navy SEAL who just blown their entire operation wide open. And Hendricks would have enough evidence to put every single one of them in prison for the rest of their lives. Justice, finally. Not the quick kind that came from a bullet, the slow kind that came from the system working the way it was supposed to. Elena closed the tablet and stared at the sky. The sun was setting now, painting the desert in shades of amber and rust. She listened to the convoy celebrating in the valley below, listened to Vance coordinating the security perimeter and the casualty collection, listened to the sound of helicopters in the distance, coming to bring them all home. She'd done it. Against every odd, against every expectation. She'd saved 24 men who decided she wasn't worth saving. And in doing so, she'd proved something more important than any of them would ever understand. She'd proved that being a SEAL wasn't about who abandoned you. It was about who you refused to abandon, even when they didn't deserve it, even when it cost you everything, even when the easy answer was to let them die and call it justice. Elena Thornburg closed her eyes and listened to the approaching rotors. The sound grew louder, closer, became thunder in her chest. She tried to stay conscious, tried to hold on long enough to see them land. But the darkness had other ideas, and this time, she let it come. When she opened her eyes again, she was already airborne. The helicopters had come in low over the ridge, 2 Black Hawks with door gunners scanning for threats that no longer existed. Elena watched them approach through eyes that kept trying to close, her body making executive decisions about consciousness that her mind couldn't override. She'd done the math somewhere around the time the convoy cleared the minefield. Between the initial wounds, the self-treatment, the blood loss, and the physical exertion of climbing 8 kilometers over hostile terrain, she should have been dead 3 hours ago. The fact that she was still breathing was less biology and more stubbornness. The lead helicopter had touched down 50 meters from her position, rotor wash kicking up a storm of dust and small stones. She tried to stand and made it halfway before her legs decided they were done taking orders. She'd gone down hard on one knee, caught herself with her rifle, and stayed there while the world tilted sideways and her vision narrowed to a tunnel ringed with static. Boots had hit the ground, running footsteps, voices shouting medical terminology that sounded very far away. Hands on her shoulders, her arms, checking pulses in airways, and all the things that medics checked when they found someone who should be dead, but wasn't. Someone had been cutting away her uniform, someone else starting an IV. A third voice calling for a stretcher and saying words like hypovolemic shock and critical status that all meant the same thing. She'd pushed too far and her body was sending the final invoice. Chief Thornburg, can you hear me? She'd managed a nod. Tried to speak, nothing came out but a dry rasp. Don't talk, save your energy. We're getting you out of here. The stretcher had arrived. They'd lifted her onto it with practiced efficiency, securing straps, elevating her legs, doing all the things that the medics at the triage point should have done 9 hours ago. Elena had wanted to laugh at the irony, but didn't have the breath for it. Instead, she grabbed the arm of the nearest medic and forced words past her throat. Convoy, safe? The medic had nodded. They're safe, all of them, because of you. That had been enough. She'd let Colonel Sarah Hendricks entered, uniform crisp, despite the late hour, expression unreadable. Elena had met her exactly twice before today, Both times had been brief, professional. Now the woman who commanded the entire base was pulling up a chair beside her bed. "Ma'am," Elena's voice was rough, throat raw from the intubation. "How long was I out?" 18 hours, 3 surgeries. The doctors say you're going to make it, but it was close." Hendricks leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "I've read the after-action reports, all of them. I've reviewed the evidence on the tablet you recovered. I've interviewed every member of that convoy, and I've spent the last 6 hours on conference calls with JAG, CID, and about a dozen 3-letter agencies who are all very interested in what happened yesterday." She paused. "So now I need to hear it from you. All of it, starting from when they left you behind." Elena told her. Every detail. The triage rejection, the self-treatment, the discovery of the conspiracy, the climb to the ridge, the firefight with the contractors, the decision not to take the shot on Hayward, the impossible navigation through the minefield. Hendricks didn't interrupt, didn't take notes, just listened with the intensity of someone who understood that the official record and the truth were sometimes different things. When Elena finished, Hendricks sat back. "Chief Blackwell has been relieved of duty pending investigation. His decision to deny you treatment violated every protocol we have. The fact that you survived despite that decision doesn't excuse it. He followed his training, ma'am. Triage by severity. I was conscious, mobile. By the book, I wasn't critical. You had a penetrating abdominal wound and major arterial damage. You were absolutely critical. He made an assessment based on assumption rather than examination. That's not following the book. That's negligence." Hendricks' voice hardened. "And I will not tolerate negligence in my command, regardless of the outcome." Elena didn't argue, because Hendricks was right. Blackwell had looked at her and seen a woman who couldn't possibly be as badly hurt as she claimed, had made a judgment call based on bias rather than evidence. And that kind of thinking got people killed. "Captain Hayward is in custody," Hendricks continued. "He'll survive the gunshot wound long enough to stand trial. The contractors embedded in the convoy have been arrested. Ares Tactical Solutions is currently being raided by federal agents across 4 states. The bank accounts you identified have been frozen. The evidence you recovered is sufficient to prosecute not just this operation, but dozens of others going back 18 months. "How much?" Elena asked. "Excuse me? How much did they steal? Total?" Hendricks's expression went cold. "Current estimate is $42 million. Medical supplies, weapons, vehicle parts, all of it diverted and sold to the highest bidder, while soldiers died because they didn't have the equipment they needed." She paused. "Vance discovered the first discrepancy 3 days ago, started asking questions. Hayward panicked and decided that eliminating Vance was cleaner than trying to cover up the evidence. So the ambush was specifically to kill Vance. The ambush was to kill Vance and anyone else who might have seen the evidence. You, Specialist Kessler, Private Bradock, all of you were on the target list. The minefield was insurance. If the ambush didn't get everyone, the mines would." Hendricks met Elena's eyes. "They didn't count on you surviving the first attempt. And they definitely didn't count on you being determined enough to walk 8 kilometers through hostile territory to save the people who left you behind." Elena looked down at her hands. They were bandaged, IV lines running into both arms, monitors clipped to her fingers. She'd pushed her body past every reasonable limit and quite a few unreasonable ones. The doctors had told her she'd need months of recovery, physical therapy, possible permanent damage to her leg. All for men who decided she wasn't worth the medical supplies. "Ma'am, I need to ask, did I do the right thing? Coming back for them?" Hendricks didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was softer than Elena had ever heard it. "Chief Thornbird, I've been in the Army for 32 years. I've commanded soldiers in 3 wars and a dozen smaller conflicts. I've written letters to families explaining why their sons and daughters aren't coming home. And I've learned that there's a difference between following orders and doing what's right. You had every justification to activate your beacon and let someone else handle it. Every reason to let that convoy drive into the minefield and call it justice. But you didn't. You came back. And because you came back, 24 soldiers are alive today who wouldn't be otherwise. She stood. So yes, Chief, you did the right thing, even though it nearly killed you, maybe especially because it nearly killed you. The colonel moved toward the door, then stopped. The Navy Cross recommendation has already been submitted. Admiral Harrington himself is flying in tomorrow to present it. You've also been promoted to senior chief, effective immediately. Congratulations. Elena tried to process that. Navy Cross, promotion, recognition from the highest levels of command, all for doing what she'd been trained to do, complete the mission and bring everyone home. Ma'am, I don't need a medal. I just need to know that it meant something, that those men understand what happened. What almost happened. They understand, Hendricks said quietly. Believe me, they understand. After the colonel left, Elena stared at the ceiling and tried to reconcile the person she'd been yesterday morning with the person she was now. Same name, same face, same scars plus a few new ones. But something fundamental had shifted. She'd walked through fire and come out the other side, changed in ways she couldn't quite articulate yet. The door opened again. This time it was Specialist Amy Kessler, out of uniform, looking younger than her 26 years. She stopped just inside the doorway, uncertain. Chief, I'm sorry. I can come back if you're resting. I've been resting for 18 hours. Come in. Kessler approached the bed slowly, carrying something wrapped in cloth. When she was close enough, Elena could see she'd been crying. Recent tears, eyes still red. I needed to see you, needed to say something. You don't owe me anything, Kessler. Yes, I do. The younger woman's voice broke. I should have fought harder for you at the triage point, should have insisted that Blackwell treat you, should have done something other than just stand there while they left you behind. The tears came again, harder this time. You saved my life yesterday, guided me through that minefield while I was losing my mind with fear. And I can't stop thinking about how I didn't save yours when you needed it. Elena reached out and took Kessler's hand. Her own grip was weak, but it was enough. Amy, listen to me. You were a junior medic following orders from a senior NCO. You hesitated. You questioned. That took courage. And when I needed someone I could trust on that radio, you were there. You followed my instructions exactly, and you helped get everyone through safely. That's what I needed from you. That's what you gave me. But I should have done more at the beginning. Maybe, probably, but we don't get to go back and fix the beginning. We only get to decide what we do with the middle and the end. Elena squeezed her hand. You did good yesterday. I'm proud of you. Kessler wiped her eyes and carefully unwrapped the cloth she'd been carrying. Inside was Elena's uniform blouse, cleaned and repaired, the torn sections stitched with care. The seal trident gleamed on the collar. I thought you'd want this. When you're ready. Elena took it with trembling hands. Yesterday she'd earned this trident a second time. Not through Hell Week or impossible evolutions, but through the harder choice. Saving the people who decided she wasn't worth saving. Thank you, Elena said quietly. This means more than you know. Kessler nodded and turned to leave, then stopped at the door. Chief, one more thing. Private Bradock wanted me to tell you something. He said to tell you that he's going to be a medic, said that if you could save lives while bleeding out in the desert, the least he could do was learn how to save them in a hospital. He starts training next month. After Kessler left, Elena held the uniform and let herself feel the weight of what she'd done. Not the medal that was coming, not the promotion, just the simple knowledge that she'd made a difference, that her pain had purpose, that the choice to come back, as impossible and irrational as it had been, was the right one. The door opened a third time. Master Chief Garrett Vance walked in, left arm in a sling, moving with the stiff gait of a man who'd been told to stay in bed and had ignored that advice. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past day, but his eyes were clear and sharp as ever. "Gunny," Elena said, "you're supposed to be resting." "So are you. Looks like we're both bad at following orders." He pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down with a grunt. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got shot, climbed a mountain, and guided a convoy through a minefield." "So, Tuesday." Despite everything, Elena laughed. It hurt her abdomen, but it was worth it. Vance had always had the ability to cut through the darkness with a single dry comment. It was one of the things that had made him a great instructor. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Vance said, "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For not fighting harder to get you on that helicopter. I knew it was wrong, knew you were critical, but I was wounded, and Hayward was pulling rank, and I let myself be put on that bird without making sure you came with me." His jaw tightened. "That was a failure of leadership, and it nearly got you killed." "Gunny, you tried. I heard you. That's more than anyone else did." "Trying isn't good enough, not when lives are on the line." He met her eyes. "I've been doing this for 33 years, trained hundreds of SEALs, watched them deploy to every hellhole on the planet. And yesterday I learned that one of the best operators I've ever trained is better than I gave her credit for, better than I deserved." Elena felt her throat tighten. "I learned from the best." "No, you learned from me. But what you did yesterday, that came from somewhere else. Somewhere deeper. That came from character." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. "I was going to give this to my grandson. He's 17. Thinks he wants to be a SEAL like his grandfather. But after yesterday, I think it belongs to you." He handed her a small pin. Not the SEAL Trident, something older. A Force Recon pin, Vietnam era, tarnished silver with the eagle and parachute insignia. It looked like it had seen hard use in harder years. "This was given to me by my instructor in 1972. He told me to pass it on to someone who embodied what it meant to be a warrior. Not just the skills, the heart." Vance closed her fingers around the pin. "You earned this yesterday, Chief. You earned it by being better than the rest of us, by choosing to save us when we'd chosen to leave you. That's not just being a warrior, that's being a leader." Elena looked down at the pin, feeling the weight of history in the metal. This had been carried through Vietnam, through the Cold War, through Desert Storm and Somalia and Afghanistan and Iraq, carried by men who'd faced impossible odds and survived through skill and courage and the refusal to quit. And now it was hers. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just promise me something." Vance leaned forward. "Promise me you'll keep being exactly who you are. The Navy is changing. Slowly. Too slowly. But it's changing. And it needs people like you to show them what the future looks like. Women who don't just meet the standard, but exceed it. Who don't ask for special treatment, but demand equal opportunity. Who prove their worth not with words, but with actions." He smiled. "You did that yesterday. You proved something that needed proving. Now promise me you'll keep proving it. Every day, until the day comes when nobody questions whether you belong." "I promise." Vance stood, wincing slightly as his shoulder protested the movement. "Good. Now get some rest. Admiral Harrington is coming tomorrow, and you need to look presentable for your medal ceremony. Can't have you passing out during the presentation. Bad optics." After Vance left, Elena pinned the Force Recon insignia to her hospital gown, right over her heart, next to where the SEAL Trident would go on her uniform. Two symbols of excellence. Two promises she'd made and kept. Two chapters in a story that was far from over. The next visitor came after dark. Private Ethan Bradock stood in the doorway, looking like he wanted to run. He was 19 years old, fresh-faced, probably on his first deployment. The kid she'd pulled from the burning Humvee, the kid she'd carried 40 meters while bleeding out. The kid who'd survived because she decided his life was worth saving. "Chief Thornbird? I'm sorry, I don't mean to bother you. I just wanted to—" "Come in, Bradock. Sit down." He sat on the edge of the chair like it might collapse under him. His hands fidgeted with his cover, twisting it nervously. I needed to thank you for saving my life. Twice. First in the ambush, then in the minefield. I don't know how to repay that. You don't repay it, you pay it forward. Someday you're going to be in a position to save someone else. When that day comes, you remember what it felt like to be pulled from a burning vehicle by someone who didn't give up on you. And you make the same choice I made. Bradock nodded, blinking hard against tears he was trying not to shed. Specialist Kessler told me you didn't have to come back for us, that you could have called for rescue and let us drive into that minefield. Is that true? Elena considered the question. The easy answer was yes. The honest answer was more complicated. I had a choice. We all have choices. The question is what kind of person we want to be when we make them. What kind of person are you? I'm the kind who doesn't leave people behind, even when they leave me, even when it's hard, even when it nearly kills me. She met his eyes, and I hope that's the kind of person you become too. Bradock stood, came to attention, and saluted with parade ground precision. Elena from her hospital bed returned it as best she could. When he left, he was standing a little taller, carrying himself with the beginning of something that might become confidence if he nurtured it carefully enough. The final visitor came just before midnight. Chief Medic Ryan Blackwell stood in the doorway, and unlike the others, he didn't ask permission to enter, just stood there in the harsh fluorescent light, looking like a man who'd been hollowed out and filled with shame. I don't have the right to be here, he said finally. I know that, but I needed to see you, needed to face what I did. Elena said nothing, just watched him struggle with words that didn't come easy. I was wrong. About you, about the situation, about everything. His voice cracked. I made a judgment call based on assumption rather than evidence. I looked at you and saw a woman, and I decided that meant you couldn't be as badly hurt as you claimed. I was wrong, and my wrong decision nearly killed you. It did more than that, Elena said quietly. It taught me exactly what I needed to know about who I could trust when everything went to hell. Blackwell flinched like she'd hit him. I've been relieved of duty, pending investigation. I'll probably lose my certification. My career is over. Good. The word hung in the air between them. Harsh, final, unforgiving. I deserve that, Blackwell said. I deserve worse. But I need you to know something. I'm not making excuses. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just need you to know that I'm going to spend the rest of my career, whatever's left of it, making sure no one else makes the same mistake I made. I'm going to teach. I'm going to train. I'm going to make damn sure that every medic who comes after me understands that triage is based on evidence, not assumption. That everyone gets assessed properly, regardless of who they are or what they look like. He met her eyes. I can't undo what I did, but I can make sure it never happens again. Elena studied him for a long moment, saw genuine remorse, saw a man who'd made a terrible mistake and was willing to carry the weight of it for the rest of his life. That didn't excuse what he'd done, didn't erase the hours she'd spent bleeding in the dirt because he'd decided she wasn't worth the medical supplies. But it was something. Then do that, she said. Make it mean something. Make sure my pain wasn't wasted. Blackwell nodded and left without another word. Admiral James Harrington arrived at 900 the next morning with an entourage that included half the base command staff and a medical team that insisted Elena be transferred to a wheelchair for the ceremony, despite her protests that she could stand. They compromised on her sitting up in bed, uniform blouse draped over her shoulders, seal trident polished and gleaming. The Admiral was 58 years old, Navy through and through, with the kind of presence that made rooms go quiet when he entered. He stood at the foot of her bed while a captain read the citation aloud. For extraordinary heroism in combat against enemy forces, Chief Petty Officer Elena Thornburg while serving as a Navy SEAL medic attached to convoy operations in eastern Syria, was severely wounded during an enemy ambush and left behind during medical evacuation. Despite life-threatening injuries, Chief Thornburg conducted self-treatment under fire, identified and neutralized a hostile contractor team, discovered evidence of insider threat and corruption, and single-handedly guided her convoy through an active minefield while under enemy fire, saving 24 lives at extreme personal risk. Her actions prevented a catastrophic loss of life and exposed a major corruption network within military logistics operations. Her courage, tactical expertise, and unwavering commitment to her fellow service members reflect the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. Harrington stepped forward and pinned the Navy Cross to her uniform. The weight of it was more than the medal. It was the weight of recognition, of validation, of proof that what she'd done mattered. Chief Thornburg, the Admiral said, the Navy is fortunate to have warriors of your caliber. You've not only saved lives, you've set a standard that will be taught for generations. I'm proud to serve alongside you. He saluted. Elena returned it, and for just a moment, the pain and the exhaustion and the memories of bleeding in the dirt all faded into something simpler. Pride, pure and uncomplicated. After the ceremony, after the photographs and the congratulations and the promises to stay in touch, Elena was finally left alone. She sat in the quiet hospital room, Navy Cross on her chest, Force Recon pin over her heart, and thought about the journey that had brought her here. She joined the Navy to honor her brother, had become a SEAL to prove she could, had survived yesterday to show that being left behind didn't mean being defeated. Every step had been harder than the last. Every challenge had demanded more than she thought she could give. And every time, she'd found something extra. Some reserve of strength she hadn't known existed until she needed it. The tablet buzzed with a message. She'd been given a new one, since the evidence tablet had been seized for the investigation. This one was from Colonel Hendricks. Media requesting interviews. Your call on whether to talk to them. Either way, your story is getting out. Thought you should know. Elena considered it. The attention, the interviews, the chance to tell her story in her own words. Part of her wanted that. Wanted to make sure people understood what had happened. Wanted to prevent it from happening again. But another part, the part that had spent 8 years in the teams learning to work in silence, wanted nothing more than to fade back into obscurity and let the work speak for itself. She typed back, "No interviews. The mission is what matters, not the recognition." Hendricks' response came immediately. "Figured you'd say that. For what it's worth, that's exactly why you deserve the recognition." 3 weeks later, Elena was transferred to Walter Reed Medical Center for extended recovery and physical therapy. The doctors said she'd need 6 months minimum before returning to active duty, possibly longer. The damage to her leg was extensive, and there was talk of permanent limitations that might affect her ability to serve in combat roles. She refused to believe them. Spend 8 hours a day in physical therapy, pushing through pain that made the minefield feel like a warm-up. Rebuilt her strength incrementally, celebrating victories measured in degrees of motion and pounds of weight lifted. The therapist called her their most stubborn patient. She took it as a compliment. Vance visited twice a week, coordinating his own therapy sessions with hers so they could suffer together. They didn't talk much during the sessions, just worked side by side, two warriors refusing to let injuries define their limitations. Afterward, they'd share coffee in the hospital cafeteria and talk about everything except what had happened in Syria. Family, plans for the future, the changing nature of warfare, and whether the old ways still mattered in a world of drones and cyber attacks. "You ever regret it?" Vance asked one afternoon. "Coming back for us?" Elena thought about it. The honest answer, "Every time I look at my leg and wonder if I'll ever run again. Every time the pain wakes me up at night. Every time I think about how much easier it would have been to just call for rescue and let you all drive into that minefield." She sipped her coffee. But no, I don't regret it, because the alternative was becoming someone I couldn't live with, and I'd rather deal with a bad leg than a bad conscience. Vance nodded slowly. I used to think courage was about not being afraid. Took me about 30 years to figure out it's actually about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. You figured that out a lot faster than I did. 6 months later, Elena stood in Arlington National Cemetery on a cold November morning. The funeral was private, limited to family and close friends, but Vance had asked her to be there. His instructor from Vietnam, the man who'd given him the Force Recon pin that now lived in Elena's display case, had finally lost his battle with cancer. He'd been 92 years old, a legend in the special operations community, and according to Vance, the finest warrior he'd ever known. After the ceremony, after the rifles and the flag, and the careful folding of honors, Elena stood beside Vance at the grave marker. It was simple granite, nothing fancy, just a name and dates and the Force Recon insignia. Exactly what the old man had wanted. He would have liked you, Vance said. Would have appreciated what you did, the choice you made. I wish I could have met him. You did, in a way. Every lesson I taught you came from him originally. Every hard truth about what it means to serve. Every standard you had to meet. Vance placed a hand on the headstone. He used to say that what defines a warrior isn't how they fight, it's what they fight for. And why they keep fighting when there's no glory in it, no recognition, no one watching to see if they quit. He turned to Elena. You proved that in Syria. Proved that being a warrior is about service, not recognition. About doing the right thing even when it costs you everything. They stood in silence for a moment, two warriors honoring a third, the cold wind cutting through their dress uniforms. Then Elena pulled the Force Recon pin from her pocket, the one Vance had given her in the hospital. She placed it on the headstone beside a dozen others that had been left by people paying their respects. I can't keep this, she said. It belongs here, with him. Vance picked up the pin and pressed it back into her hand. No, it belongs with you. He would have wanted you to have it, to carry it forward, to pass it on someday to someone who embodies the same things you do. He closed her fingers around the pin. That's how we honor them, not by leaving trinkets on graves, but by living up to the standards they set, by being worthy of the tradition they handed down. Elena pocketed the pin and saluted the headstone. Vance did the same. Then they walked together through Arlington, past rows of white markers that stretched to the horizon, each one representing a life given in service, a choice made to stand between home and harm, a warrior who'd answered the call and paid the price. You know what the hardest part is? Elena said as they walked. Not the injuries, not the recovery. It's knowing that I did everything right, by the book, exactly how I was trained, and they still left me behind. How do you come back from that? How do you trust the system again? Vance was quiet for a long moment. You don't trust the system, you trust the people who prove they deserve it. And you become the kind of person others can trust when the system fails them. He stopped walking and turned to face her. The Navy is changing, Elena. Slowly, too slowly, but it's changing. And it's changing because people like you prove that the old assumptions are wrong, that women can do the job just as well as men, that courage doesn't have a gender, that leadership is about character, not chromosomes. He smiled. You didn't just save 24 lives in Syria, you changed minds, challenged assumptions, forced people to reconsider their biases. That's worth more than any medal. Doesn't feel like it when I'm in physical therapy trying to rebuild muscles that might never work properly again. I know, but someday, maybe years from now, some young woman is going to make it through BUD/S because you proved it was possible, because you showed them what a female SEAL looks like. And she's going to save lives, lead teams, do impossible things. And it'll be because you walked through hell and came out the other side without quitting. Vance started walking again. That's legacy, Elena. That's what matters. Not the medals or the recognition, the lives you touch, the standards you set, the path you clear for those who come after. They reached the cemetery gates and stopped. Beyond them, the city waited. The normal world where people worried about normal things and didn't understand what it cost to keep them safe. Elena had been part of that world once, before BUD/S, before the teams, before Syria. She couldn't go back to being that person, didn't want to, but she could move forward as someone new, someone forged in fire and blood. Someone who'd learned that being left behind wasn't the end of the story, just a chapter in a longer journey. "You ready to get back out there?" Vance asked. "Physical therapy board meets next week. They'll probably clear you for light duty." "I don't want light duty." "I know, but you take what they give you and prove you can handle more. That's how you earn your way back. One step, then another, until they can't deny you anymore." Elena looked down at her leg. It still hurt, probably always would. Physical therapy had restored most of the function, but there were limitations now, things she couldn't do as well as before, weaknesses she'd have to compensate for. But she was standing, walking, fighting. "I'll get there," she said. 6 months after that, Senior Chief Petty Officer Elena Thornburg returned to active duty with SEAL Team 4. Not in a combat role, not yet, but as an instructor at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, teaching the next generation of SEALs what it meant to serve, what it meant to persist, what it meant to never leave anyone behind, even when they'd left you. On her first day, she stood in front of a class of BUD/S candidates and told them a story. Not about medals or recognition or glory, about being left behind in the Syrian desert with a hole in her gut and a choice to make. About climbing a mountain while bleeding out. About saving the people who decided she wasn't worth saving. About learning that being a SEAL wasn't about the trident on your chest. It was about the choices you made when nobody was watching and there was no reward for doing the right thing except knowing you'd done it. The candidates listened in silence. Some of them understood. Some wouldn't understand until years later, when they faced their own impossible choices and had to decide what kind of warrior they wanted to be. But they'd remember. They'd carry this story with them into combat, into leadership, into the moments that defined whether they were just soldiers or something more. After the class, Elena walked along the beach where she'd spent countless hours during her own training. The surf was cold and relentless, just like she remembered. She stood at the water's edge and thought about everyone who'd brought her to this moment. Devon, who died so she could learn to fight corruption. Vance, who taught her that standards mattered more than opinions. The old Force Recon instructor she'd never met, but whose legacy she carried. The 24 men she'd saved in Syria, who'd learned that leaving people behind had consequences. And Hayward, sitting in a military prison, awaiting trial for conspiracy, corruption, and attempted murder. His story was ending. Hers was just beginning. Elena pulled the Force Recon pin from her pocket and held it up to the light. Tarnished silver, eagle and parachute, a promise made and kept across generations. Someday she'd pass it on to someone who embodied the same values, someone who chose service over self, mercy over vengeance, the hard right over the easy wrong. But not yet. She still had more to prove, more to teach, more to give. She pinned the insignia to her uniform, right beside her SEAL trident, and walked back toward the training compound. Behind her, the surf continued its endless assault on the shore, relentless, unforgiving, exactly like the standards she'd sworn to uphold. They'd left her to die in the Syrian desert because they thought she was expendable, thought she was weak, thought she didn't belong. They'd been wrong about all of it. And every day she wore the uniform, every life she touched, every student she taught, she proved exactly how wrong they'd been. Elena Thornburg was a Navy SEAL, not because someone had given her permission, but because she'd earned it in blood and pain and the refusal to quit when quitting would have been easier. She'd earned it by being better than the people who'd abandoned her, by choosing to save them anyway, by proving that warriors are defined not by who abandons them, but by who they refuse to abandon. And she'd keep earning it every single day for the rest of her life. Because that's what warriors did. They served. They persisted. They never left anyone behind. Not ever. Not even when their own had left them first.